try to convince them it's much better to get along than.
I think you get a lot of use down in Massachusetts these days. Boy, are they contentious. I want to come help someone.
Okay, everyone, it's 7 o'clock. Attention, it's 7 o'clock. We're going to call the meeting of Planning and Economic Development's public hearing to order at on Tuesday, November 19th at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr.
I'm here.
Alderman Derek Tebow is here. Alderman Ernest A. Jetty.
Here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens. Alderman Tyler Govea, Vice Chair.
Here.
So we have 4 present. We also have in attendance Alderman Dowd, Alderman Wilshire. We have Alderman Senate. We have Corporate Counsel Steve Bolton. We also have Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director, and Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director.
All right. Director Sullivan, do you want to give an overview before I open to public testimony?
Happy to. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Matt Sullivan, Community Development Division Director for the City of Nashua. Here this evening on behalf of O24-037, described within the legislation as amending the land use code regarding municipal changing signs. I do just want to thank Corporation Counsel for being here this evening. I know there were some questions raised by members of the committee, and I expect some might be directed to Corporation Counsel during the committee's deliberation on the ordinance, but happy to try and answer those as well during this public hearing if that's appropriate at such time. Fundamentally, this change is an amendment to the land use code that will permit the installation of changing signs, or particularly, I think, for the purposes of discussion tonight, electronic changing signs at municipal facilities, those that actually accommodate governmental uses across the city of Nashua executed on behalf of the city. By quick way of background, Nashua is a bit unique across the state of New Hampshire in the sense that many municipalities under RSA 674-54 actually self-exempt themselves from applying their land use code or their zoning regulations to their own uses, including signage. Here in Nashua, for a very good reason, I think, the city adopted NRO 190-2, I believe it is, that actually says that the city is subject to all of its own rules and regulations, including its sign ordinance. Over time, there have been several adjustments to the code strategically, I would say, that have given us some level exemption to allow us to operate as a governmental entity, but to do so generally within the regulations that are spelled out in the land use code. But again, there have been some changes here and there, and that's really what's being brought forward to you this evening. So before I get into maybe the details of what's going on here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why and not why, because I think there's been some attribution of this amendment to a couple of specific signs across the community. I want to talk about that. This land use code change is being brought forward under sponsorship of Alderman Dowd and Alderman O'Brien. Yes, that is true. But this is an issue that's actually been in front of not only the planning and community development departments and division, but has been an area of high interest from several city departments, including emergency management, fire, police, DPW, those that operate facilities, and I should mention schools as well, those that operate facilities that either themselves have information that needs to be shared with the public or are interested in sharing general information about public goings-on, whether that's events or changes to fees at the solid waste facility. There's a general interest in sharing public information on signs. And fortunately, electronic signs give an enhanced ability to actually share that dynamically without someone going out manually to change information. It allows us to share more, I would argue. And so those different departments have expressed what I would argue is a valid public interest in allowing for changing signs at their locations. The current land use code does allow for changing signs, but it doesn't expressly allow changing signs electronically for municipal uses, and that's what this change really seeks to do. One thing I want to point out immediately is that if this were to pass, unlike a recent change that was adopted by the Board of Aldermen about a year ago, if, let's say, the police department proposed an electronic changing sign, that would not be subject to a special exception at the Zoning Board of Adjustment. It would be, as we refer to it, a by right use. They could apply for a sign permit. That permit would be reviewed by our zoning administrators within the planning department, and that would be fully allowable use subject to the restrictions that are spelled out within this ordinance here. So I want to be really clear about that. This would be a by right use to have these electronic messaging signs. What I want to be careful of is that there have been several signs proposed or erected over recent years that I think would either have been impacted or would be impacted by this proposal. I think we're going to hear about a few of those this evening, and I'm happy to talk about those, at least for the perspective of community development in the planning department. This change is being brought forward because we see a legitimate public purpose to allowing electronic messaging signs and changing signs. Certainly, I think it would have an impact on other signs that have been proposed across the community, some of which have been contentious, some of which have not. But generally, I do think that this is a good public policy step for the city to be undertaking, and I can answer questions about that once we get into the meeting. Just to quickly tell you a few things about the ordinance, I know I've already taken up quite a bit of your time, but this does a few different things, obviously sort of going in the order that you see it within the legislation itself. In section 190-197, essentially what we're doing here is that in the changing sign sections of the ordinance, we're saying that all of the standards in there do not apply to municipal signs. Instead, the municipal electronic changing signs are regulated in a separate section of the ordinance. So we're just pointing people to the appropriate section. And we're establishing a new section within the municipal government signs section, and that is one that specifically contemplates and lays out the standards for changing signs. And let me just talk quickly about some of the what I would call controls are that we've put in place here. So in section B, which is on, I believe, page 2 of your ordinance, we have laid out some dimensional standards for electronic messaging signs that will be changing. One, they'll be restricted to all of the same dimensional standards that are already in the sign ordinance. So if there's a dimensional constraint within, let's say, the R district or the RC district, the total sign area would still have to conform with that. So all of those dimensional controls are still in place that would apply to a traditional sign. Only one sign per municipally owned parcel would be permitted. So if you had, if there were one sizable parcel that had multiple municipal uses on it, only one sign would be permitted. You couldn't have 13 signs out the road for all of the different individual uses. So that's some level of control that's in place there. The electronic messaging area, so this is really the area that would show dynamic text, cannot exceed 75% of the total sign area or 40 square feet, whichever is smaller. So that 40 square feet acts as a hard cap. So even if you had a huge sign, it couldn't exceed the 40, but it could go up to 75 square feet or 75% of the total sign area, provided that it stays under 40 square feet. One thing that I think is really critical, and I remember talking to Alderman Dowd about this when this legislation was being crafted, is this next piece, and that is moving images or videos. There was, I think, a real legitimate public safety concern expressed as part of this, and a sort of a distractive element, that if we had videos or other moving pictures on a sign, that could be a hazard for drivers or walkers or other users. That's not the intent. This is for showing text, limited graphics, but really just public information. So that was inserted as a protection there. Fixed levels of illumination and with a fixed graphic for not less than 5 seconds. This is a kind of a classic in the world of electronic messaging code, but you don't want it to be changing nor flashing in a way that's distracting or hazardous, or more importantly, that I think we'll talk about tonight, if this sign is located in some proximity to other users, whether that's a multi-use building or a residential building, you don't want it to be disrupting their sense of their home and a property that they may own or rent. And so I think that's a really important piece of this. The way that signs actually change in number 6, obviously we don't want there to be fancy flashing elements changing from one piece of text to another. So again, it's about controlling and limiting neighborhood impact and community impact, and so that's why that's included there. The ability to adjust the brightness, so I think most of our municipal users, I would suggest all of them in fact, want to be good neighbors. They don't want to be disruptive, but they do want to share information. And so the ability to adjust the brightness, and I know there's been specific conversation in some locations that some signs will be turned off at night, electronic signs. They would be completely shut off so that they're not visible at night if it would be overly distracting. But again, that ability to not overly illuminate in the area and be context sensitive, I think is really, really important. And then the last two things, no advertisement. This is something that came up in discussion with Alderman Dowd. I think it's something that I may have raised, and this is intended to be for municipal uses, and so it should honor that, and therefore no advertisement will be permitted as part of the sign. And then lastly, fixed images or more than 3 lines of text would be the allowance here. And so again, we want to limit distractive elements of the sign, or distracting elements of the sign rather, and I think this is a control that's put in place to do that. And so I'm happy to address any questions that the committee might have. I expect there may be some discussion about any or all of these provisions tonight. But ultimately, I think this is an ordinance that's intended to achieve a public purpose, and that is to ensure that our residents are educated on the goings-on in the community, but that the signs that are showing that information are done so in a context-sensitive but also dynamic way. And so that's the reason that this legislation is being put forward. Happy to answer any questions that committee members may have now or during the actual meeting.
Alderman Dowd, we're going to take the questions during discussion, if that's okay.
Okay.
Or do
We
you...
always allow the clarifying questions.
Oh, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, just a couple things. One, it was sponsored by Alderman O'Brien and myself as Chair and Vice Chair of Infrastructure. And the original discussions we had was because we are continually chastised for not telling the public things that they should be aware of, and this is one way. But just to clarify what you had said, can only be put on city-owned property, so it can't be put in all the residential areas in the city. And it's something, these signs don't appear with no cost, so any sign that was going to be erected for any reason would, and this is a question for you, would they have to get the funding through some action of the Board of Aldermen, since we control the funding. And it would probably, in that vein, have to be part of some type of project which would include the funding, and the project would go through the planning board. And by the way, the planning board gave you a approval of this legislation, so.
Just if I may, Mr. Chair, just to
Yes, go ahead.
I think provide factual responses to that. So I want to be clear that this, to Alderman Dowd's question about residential areas, this would allow changing signs on municipally owned properties in residential areas. So, and there may be discussion about this tonight. If it's a property in a more rural section of the community, a sign could be placed there that is changing. So I want to be really upfront and clear about that. It is not limited to the downtown only or Amherst Street only. It's across the city, and I expect we can have some conversation there. The only other thing, Alderman Dowdy, you're right that generally these would be in projects that are larger capital projects. I think the one exception to that might be something that's within the annual operating budget that's presented by a department that's identified as a site-specific improvement for an existing facility, but that's something that you would still see as part of the budget process.
If it's part of the budget process, it would still get reviewed
Follow up?
by the Board of Aldermen.
Follow up, Alderman Dowd?
Yes.
Sorry. Alderman Dowd and I like to rib each other when we're taking turns at chairs. Go ahead, Alderman Tew.
Yeah, just can you clarify how many of these signs we currently have now? So, like, you know, if we had, say, 20 in storage, we'd all whip them out now at once this passes, or do we just
Sure.
have a couple right now that are already out in the community?
Yeah, so Alderman Tebow, there are, and I want to distinguish this. We are not talking here about these orange signs that you see moving from construction or roadwork site, you know, throughout the community. I'm not talking about those.
Right.
What we do have in the community, and I think we have about 5 of them, are signs on sites that are either municipally or school operated, you could say they're the same thing, that show some level of dynamic text changing. We have some of these out there, and I would say there are about 5 across the community right now. We don't have a whole lot of them in storage. We have none, in fact, but it's possible that they have been requested with nearly every capital project that the city has done, though. Almost every entity that comes forward with a substantial facility improvement project has asked for some level of a sign that shows information. Now, substantial projects, you know, if we're doing a pump station for wastewater, there's not going to be a changing sign at that type of facility. I can't commit to that, I suppose, but these are generally programmed for sites that are administrative headquarters or operationally really important for the Nashua resident in a way that they need to be seeing more readily updates to information. I hope that makes some sense.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just have one clarifying question. Are there currently any of those signs up right now in a place that's in violation of the existing ordinance?
That's a great question, Alderman Moran. There are 2 signs, in my opinion, that in the context of our administrative interpretation of the ordinance, are compliant. However, there could be an argument made that because they could be viewed from a public right-of-way, which has been our traditional interpretation, it is possible that they could be viewed to be in violation. I'm not issuing an opinion on that this evening, but I think there is a matter of administrative gloss in play here and how our interpretation has been applied. So I don't want to say that they're in violation, but there are some signs that are in internal site locations that could be potentially viewed from public rights of way, and that's how we've generally interpreted the ordinance.
Thank you. Alderman Clemmons?
Well, since we're all going around here, I'd like to clarify that point further by asking, were those 5 signs, did they go through the planning process to get approved and put up?
Yes, they did. And I would just remind the committee, because I'm reminding myself right now more than anything, there was a provision stricken from the zoning ordinance about a year ago when we actually changed the special exception standard that said that signs shown on a site plan were permitted by right. And so there were signs shown on site plans that were appropriately approved. So I don't want to introduce too much muddiness into that, Alderman Clemmons, to your point, but like any zoning ordinance, it could be debated, but that provision exists at the times those signs were erected.
Great.
Yeah.
Alderman Jettie?
So I only bring this up because Alderman Dowd made note of the fact that that the planning board had recommended approval of this. And I only bring this up because when I looked at the planning board minutes, Mr. Durfee, when he presented this to the planning board, he said that he said that there was a change in the ordinance a while back to change the process for which municipal changing signs could be permitted by special exception by the zoning board. This builds on that and adds in some language to include standards for municipal signs. In some ways, it is more stringent than what is currently allowed, such as size. They would be permitted in all districts, subject to special exception approval. So, and when Mr. Durfee said that, wasn't that a misstatement of what this ordinance does?
The component of that, Alderman Jettie, that I think needs clarification is the last sentence that you read, and that is the fact that a special exception would still be required for a changing sign. I do not believe that's accurate. I believe Mr. Durfee's statements at the beginning are accurate, that under the old ordinance, a special exception would have been required. This ordinance removes that requirement. So I think that is a statement that requires clarification. And perhaps getting him a little bit ahead of the process, if that's a fundamental concern for this group, that the planning board's recommendation may have been under false pretenses, we're happy to go back to them and talk to them about an accurate interpretation of the ordinance. I also haven't had a chance to review the video associated with that, Alderman Jettie, but I believe the minutes to be accurate, so there could be clarification required.
Thank you.
Okay, no more clarifying questions. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sullivan. All right, so any members of the public here to testify in favor? Please come up to the mic and share your name and address. All right, seeing none. In opposition? Anyone in opposition? No? I have 3 emails from residents. Without objection, I would like to accept them as opposition. They are from Connie Page of 16 West Hill Drive, Gloria McCarthy of 65 Musket Drive, and Charles Fisher. No address listed. Any objection? No. All right, any further testimony in favor? We'll move past opposition into favor again. Right. All right, seeing none, one more time for opposition. Seeing none. Also, for the record, Alderman Clemmons joined us at 7:02. All right, I will now close the public hearing of O-24-037 at 7:20 p.m. And I will open the regular meeting of Planning and Economic Development today, November 19th at 7:20 PM. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tebow is here. Alderman Ernest A. Jettie.
Here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Tyler Gavea, Vice Chair.
Here.
We also have with us Alderman Dowd, Alderman Richard Dowd, Alderman Lori Wilshire, Alderman Tim Senate, and Corporation Counsel Steve Bolton, Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director, and Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director.
Great. So now I will open up for public comment. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on something that we will be taking up tonight? None? All right, then discussion. I will invite Director Hannum and the Arts Commission up to feel free to take a seat, and I believe they have a presentation. Whenever you're ready to take it over, Director. Oh, do you have the,
Yes, how I do. I'll give that to you. Thank you. Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director. I have with me Judy Carlson, a commissioner from the Arts Commission. I started working with the Arts Commission this summer and am excited to hear some of the reporting. They did some really intense information gathering about how the arts affect economic development. And as we've seen the Center for the Arts increase the number of businesses that are frequented, especially on those show nights. I'm going to hand it over to Judy.
Is this the,
Yep, you just have to kind of point it that way.
that one?
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity. What I'm here to do is to share the results of the AEP6, that's the Arts, Economic, and Prosperity survey that was done by American for the Arts. And American for the Arts is the national organization that advocates for the arts across the United States.
sorry, technicality. If you could just state your name and address, business
Oh,
address is
okay.
fine. Sorry, it gets transcribed, and we want to make sure Donna gets everything correctly.
Sure. My name is Judith Carlson. I'm an arts commissioner in the National Arts Commission, and I live at 15 Manchester Street in Nashua.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And today I'm here to give you a quick look at the results. Arts and cultures build strong communities, we all know that, but nonprofits, organizations, they also employ people locally. They purchase goods and services from local businesses. They produce experiences that are magnets for visitors and for new residents alike. And the whole idea behind this survey and study is that to change the idea behind nonprofit arts organizations as charities as an industry that affects the economies of where they reside. So, up here, next one?
This one,
This
to
one?
the right, yep,
Okay.
there you go.
This is the sixth study done by American for the Arts. Normally, they do it every 5 years, so it's been going on for over 30 years. And it was postponed the last time around because of COVID. And the information was collected between spring of 2022 and 2023. And you can see this is not just a survey of here in Nashua, it's across the entire United States. And the data is based on very conservative, reliable methodology that's been going on for 30 years. So why do they survey just nonprofits in this study? It's because nonprofits depend on donors and oftentimes government money from both the national, state, and local level to do what they do. So this gives the data to show that nonprofits, arts organizations have a real ROI on the investments that their donors and the civic make in them. Okay, great, thank you. Here in Nashua, there were 22 organizations that participated in one of the two surveys. The first survey was the organizational survey that looked at the profit and loss for the organization over the past year and where they spent their money, how many people they employed, et cetera. We can get the next one. And then many of those organizations, as well as a few others, actually put on performances. And we also did audience intercept studies at those performances and collected 830 of those surveys that looked at the money that was spent, asked the questions of the audiences themselves. So the result of this is that in Nashua, that the economic impact over that period was $11 million, with $7.4 million coming from the organizations themselves and $4 million from their audiences. And that, again, this is to make the point that not only do arts organizations provide experiences and enhance the quality of life where they live, they employ people, they purchase goods and services, they do marketing and promotion, they're members of the chamber, they're good business citizens. And unlike many industries, arts generate significant amounts also from the spending resulting in the events they put on. People come, they spend money and go to dinner, they pay babysitters, et cetera. So the overall economic impact, if you look at that, the analysis measures not only the jobs supported through the community, not just at the arts organizations. So that results in jobs, personal income, and government revenues as well. And because these organizations are rooted in the community, these jobs and spending remain in the community. They won't be shipped out of state or overseas. They're right here. And also, like many other industries, the attendees spend their money here. This looks at the average of $36.31 per person per event that they spend when they come here on things like parking garages, restaurants, hotels, even local babysitters. And nationally, the number was 38.46, so Nashua is very close to the national average, even though we're a small city, and this looked at all the major cities across the United States. So we do pretty well here. The interview attendees also gave us their zip codes. So the way America for the Arts works is if you're non-local, that means you're outside of Hillsborough County. That's a pretty broad non-local, But here, local is 72%, was within Hillsborough County, and non-local was 28%. Now, the National Center of the Arts also collects data from zip codes of who attends theirs, and in their report for the first year, 70% of the people attending the Center for the Arts were local. That meant they lived here in Nashua. So there's a big difference, and the local is a lot higher than it shows here. And then the data also shows that the arts draw visitors, and those visitors spend their money here. And if you look at the local people spend about $33 per visit, where the non-locals spend $46.60, which is another reason why a vibrant arts community is good for the economy here in Nashua. Oops. There we go. There. Now that for the first time, American for the Arts also looked at the social impact. You can read the slide as easily as I can here. And basically what they're saying here is that people feel that investing in the arts in the community makes a big difference. And at the national level, in the national findings, 86% said the arts and culture are important, and 79% believe that arts and culture are really important to the local economy. And additionally, above that, that arts and culture provides experiences of shared experiences to different races and ethnicities, and 63% say that arts and culture help better understand their cultures and their communities. So, in summary, that's a really quick interview, because I know you're all busy, have a lot to do, but there's a lot more data. The full reports are available at the Arts and Culture, at the Arts Commission website, on the city website. We have the whole report there if you want to browse through it. And I also have a handout here for you that with the 6 takeaways that I'd like to leave with you. And again, we at the Arts Commission think it's important that legislatures know that when you invest in the arts, you're investing in the economy as well as the quality of life for the citizens here in Nashua. And thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any questions? Well, thank you so much for, oh, I'm sorry.
I don't have a question, more of a
I
comment.
caught you at the corner of my eye the last second.
Thank you. I appreciate this, and I think we knew when we took on this Performing Arts Center that this would happen, that it would make a better community, a better place to live, better quality of life, and this kind of shows us that it does, and we appreciate you bringing that to us.
Well, that's one of the reasons that the Arts Commission went ahead and joined. This is the second time that this survey's been done in Nashua. We did one off after the previous study was done, just before the Arts Center was built, just to give a baseline, but then we were told we can't really use the baseline because COVID affected the numbers so badly. It was interesting to see that this time around, we were very similar to the pre-COVID one, even in spite of the fact that nationally the numbers have been down because of COVID in the arts. So we do have a good baseline here also to look, forward to, and highly recommend that the Economic Development Department funds this survey every 5 years and keeps this kind of data going, so we do have the actual data to back the thoughts that arts are not only good for the community, but they're good business as well.
Thank you. I agree with President Wilshire that it's a great takeaway to have such a vibrant downtown and to have arts and culture a part of our downtown and economy throughout the city. I certainly appreciate everything that's going on in the arts and culture community, and I've seen such big change, especially with the arts, the Performing Arts Center. I will say I would like to see different types of shows, but a little younger, maybe Motionless in White, a band would be great. Chaz Palminteri is actually my cousin, my wife's cousin, so that's brought up a lot of trauma in my family that I have to rehear about how he didn't tell the story the right way. But other than that, it's great. And without objection, we'll take this top 8 EP 6 takeaways into the record. Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you just touched on a very important piece, which was our pre-COVID numbers to our post-COVID numbers. And it's good to hear that we're bouncing back to almost pre-COVID numbers-ish, which, I think that was the big worry of everybody when we went into the pandemic. And it's good to see that we're coming back out of it and that our numbers are strong, especially in a smaller city like Nashua.
In fact, the amount of spending by the audiences is higher than it was pre-COVID. And the overall numbers in, the $11 million is very close to what it was pre-COVID. So that is unusual. And, it didn't show any big jump or anything with the opening of the Performing Arts Center. But also, we were lucky that they extended the time period because of the difficulty collecting data after COVID. And the time period included April and May after the center opened, so we were actually able to get a number of the surveys in from the center itself. So there is some data in there, and I'm sure that helped in the numbers as well.
I'll just add to that, that there was only 2 months of data collected from the Performing Arts Center. And so the future AEP 6 will hopefully have all of that data once the center was kind of up and running and had a few years under its belt. So we hope to see a big jump on that next one.
Great. Any other questions? Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, and to debunk a theory that isn't true, the United Way used the Performing Arts Center the other night for karaoke night, and the place was packed, several hundred people, and it was just a great event, and my granddaughter, who's 15, got to sing in front of that many people, and she did a great job, got high scores, so, and there were other young people involved and older people as well, but it was a good night for all, and they asked the question, how many people is the first time in the Performing Arts Center, and there was a fair number in there that haven't been in, and the people really thought it was an amazing venue, and they had no concept of how good it was till they actually went in and saw the venue.
I also want to stress that we did this not only for having some baseline data around the Performing Arts Center, but we have a very vibrant arts community here. And these individual arts organizations always are having difficulty in raising money and keeping themselves going, and having this data to go back to not only their donor base, which are pretty loyal, but to go out to businesses in the community and say, you know, supporting the arts is good business is really important to them as well. I'm sure that they would agree to that. We have a couple in the audience here today. So another main reason we did that is, you know, to give them the data they need to back up their fundraising as well. And I hope you all keep this in mind in the future when budgets come up again, because the Arts Commission had asked for an increase in its budget and got turned down this year. So please keep that in mind in the future as well.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I certainly
you.
appreciate it. All right. Communications.
We have communications from Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director, regarding the National Arts Commission study results. We also have communications from Sam Durfee, Planning Manager, regarding referral from the Board of Aldermen on Ordinance O-24-037, amending the land use code regarding municipal changing signs.
There being no objection, I will accept the communications and place them on file. Unfinished business.
There is none.
New business resolutions.
There is none.
New business ordinances.
I'd like to make a motion for final passage of O-24-037, amending the land use code regarding municipal changing signs.
That motion's in order. Discussion on the motion? Alderman Jettie and then Alderman Govea.
Well, the sponsor is here.
Alderman Dow, would you like to introduce the legislation as you sponsored? Director Sullivan, feel free to come up and have a seat.
Sure. The question came up relative to providing more information to the public. At times, we've had several members of the public chastise us for they didn't know that was happening or this wasn't happening, and of course we don't have a local newspaper anymore, and there's no generalized email coming out of City Hall. So I know some aldermen do newsletters, but a lot of people that don't know what's going on from time to time, and this would allow select locations, not a whole ton of them, and it probably wouldn't affect a single sign anytime in the near future that I'm aware of, but it would allow for municipal properties with, whether it's a fire station, a police station, schools. Typically in the schools, we use the signs to assist in controlling traffic and keeping parents informed, because typically when the school sends something home on a piece of paper, it never arrives in the parents' hands. So when they're waiting there to pick up or drop off their students, the signs are there to give them that information. And it's varied and it changes so that, you know, they can just change it from the office just by typing it in. But the question came up about, you know, can we provide more information to the public in certain selected sites? Now, this would allow that to happen, but it's still, any sign that goes in is going to have to go through the planning department and get scrutinized. And it's going to have to meet all the criteria of the signage. And it's just eliminating one step in that process. But again, if any sign that's going to go in any municipal building is going to have funding approved here. So it's going to have that review. It's going to have to go through the planning department, maybe even on the plans for that site, go through the planning board. And so there are a lot of checks and balances on this. And, you know, again, it's to have the ability to provide signage in certain locations. And I certainly don't think we're putting signs all over the city in residential areas, because first of all, we don't own property in those areas. But it would allow, if that were the zoning, to put one on that location, or it could be Homeland Stadium, it could, you know, different places. So we sat down and hashed this out and came up with the current ordinance you see, changes you see before you. I mean, if there are other changes people want to see in that, my suggestion would be we listen to what the comments are in this meeting, and if there are a lot of them, I would suggest that we hold it in your committee, because I'm not on this committee, and give it back to Director Sullivan to make those changes. But it's probably not perfect, because you know, we sat down and hashed this out back and forth, and this is something that I think would improve the communication with the general public. And again, it's very limited locations. It's not, we're not gonna make this Las Vegas. And the sign ordinance has strict regulations on what the signs can and can't do and how big they can be. So they still have to meet all those requirements.
Thank you, Alderman Dowd. So I have Alderman Jettie, Alderman Govea, and then Alderman Clemmons, and then Alderman Tebow. Alderman Jettie.
So, thank you. So I'm adamantly opposed to this. You know, we start out with our ordinances, you know, many years ago. I think Alderman McCarthy was behind the move to make the city, require the city to comply with the zoning ordinances, just like everybody else has to. That's section 190-2. And that was the starting point for this. I know that the sponsors, at least Alderman Dowd, and you heard Director Sullivan say that this has nothing to do with any particular sign, but I have some history with a particular sign in my ward, and that is the sign in front of the new DPW building. When I was on the committee, the infrastructure committee at the time that building was being built, and there was came before the committee that there would be a sign, of course, an identification sign showing where the building is, and the sign was not in compliance with the sign ordinance, and the sign ordinance as applied to that area, which is a residential neighborhood. It's an R40 residential zone, and the sign that was proposed, was much larger, and it contained electronic messaging provision. And I pointed out that that it's not allowed. It doesn't comply with the sign ordinance and the zoning ordinance. And I was told, well, we'll just apply for a variance. And I pointed out that the land on which this sign would be located was land that the city had acquired and in front of the landfill area along West Hollis Street. And the resolution, there was a lot of debate about acquiring that property, and there was an amendment to the resolution which provided that nothing would be put on these parcels that they were acquiring, which was not in conformance with the existing zoning regulations for that neighborhood. And I asked City Corporation Counsel, Attorney Bolton, to review that, and he issued an opinion that, a variance would not cure the problem that the resolution presented, in that the resolution said what I just said it said, that it has to comply with the regulations. And the proposed sign did not comply with the regulations, so, you couldn't do it unless you went back and amended the original resolution. So, a variance was not requested after Attorney Bolton issued that opinion. But then we were presented with a change to the zoning ordinance. And at the time, the change to the zoning ordinance, we were told, had nothing to do with the DPW sign. And the change in that zoning ordinance was that instead of the signs, electronic messaging signs being prohibited in that area, we were asked to pass legislation which said that if it had a governmental purpose, an electronic messaging sign, would be permitted by right, but subject to a special exception from the zoning board. And so the difference between a variance you have 5 elements you have to prove. The most difficult is hardship. And so it eliminated that hardship provision, because to get a special exception, the requirements are fewer than getting a variance. But one of the requirements, or among the requirements, are that the zoning board has to find that what you're doing is not, does not violate the integrity of the neighborhood, or is not out of character with the neighborhood. So, over my objection, the Board of Aldermen passed that, and I remember during the debate, some of the aldermen said, well, we're not removing all of the safeguards because they will still have to go before the zoning board to get a special exception. So there will be review by the zoning board, so we feel comfortable doing this. So we passed that, so we changed the ordinance. So now you can request a special exception to allow for this electronic messaging sign anywhere in the city. So coincidentally, shortly after we passed that, the city applied for a special exception for this sign in front of the DPW building. And so there was a hearing, and the zoning board denied the special exception on the grounds that this electronic messaging sign would not be in character with the neighborhood. So I suggested that that after that decision, that the the Department of Public Works come forward with a sign that did comply with the regulations. And the regulations allow a very nice ground sign, so identification sign, to show where the building is, identify the building. It can be pretty much what they wanted without the electronic messaging sign component. And if they really wanted to comply with the regulations, it would be a little smaller than what they were proposing. Well, they've done nothing. It's been about a year. I asked the mayor, what's going on? Because what they do have is one of those orange portable flashing signs. Flashes DPW building, 848 West Hollis Street. DPW building, 848 West Hollis Street. And so why don't they do a nice sign like they had proposed? And he said, well, the director says that she's asking Alderman Dowd to come forth with legislation which would allow the sign. Okay. That's what the mayor told me. So now we have this legislation, and when people say it has nothing to do with the DPW building, I have to accept them at their word. But I'm telling you, I'm skeptical about, maybe Alderman, I believe Alderman Dowd, and I believe Director Sullivan, but somebody wants that sign. And they've done nothing to come up with a sign that complies with the regulations. They're trying to change the legislation so that they can get the sign that they want. But even if none of that is true, what bothers me is, we have long had the attitude in our legislation, in our ordinances, that the city must comply with the same zoning law regulations as everybody else. And Director Sullivan feels, very strongly, his opinion is different. He feels that for governmental purpose, the city government, ought to be able to put signs where it feels is necessary for governmental purposes. And what this legislation does is it allows the government, no matter what people say about, what their intentions might be, and I don't doubt what their intentions are, the effect of this ordinance is to remove the oversight by the zoning board to review these signs, to make sure that a sign that is out of character with a neighborhood is not allowed. Neighborhoods will not have the ability to complain, to say to the zoning board, this sign is not in character with this neighborhood. We're removing the citizens' right to tell the government, you got to comply with the laws just like everybody else. And I think getting away from that premise that was adopted many years ago, and we've complied with it ever since then, is a big step in the wrong direction. Now, the reasons that are being put forth for the necessity for these signs is to provide more information to the public. That's a laudable goal. I think all of us have talked about, the difficulty of informing citizens. So I understand that, but, we have many ways of informing the public. We have a television station. We have a radio station. We have the ability to send emails. We have social media. Our phones, there's, I get a warning on my phone when there's a snowstorm coming from the city, or when there's a rainstorm coming, when, an Amber Alert has been issued. There are many ways that the city can inform people. you know, the idea of notifying parents. You know, when Alderman Dowd and I spoke about this several days ago, he pointed out the sign in front of the new McCarthy School. So I went up and looked at it. That sign is right in front of the school. It's nowhere near Buck Meadow Road. It's right in front of the school, and as parents come in to drop off their kids or pick them up, you know, they see the sign. The information regarding the school aimed at the parents is right there. It's not being broadcast to the general neighborhood. It's not being flashed on, you know, on Buck Meadow or, you know, in the streets around the school. It's right there. And the school is, you know, far enough from the roads, you know, where the sign is, it doesn't bother anyone. So I have no problem with that type of sign and that type of location. But what this ordinance does, it says the city can put a sign on any, you know, government-owned property. Now, the comment was made is that we don't have that many properties. You know, I'm sorry, you know, go to the website. Look at the maps. There's a map on the website of city-owned parcels. It covers the city. Every ward has city-owned parcels. You know, and you know, they're all colored. Ward 5 is, you know, it's Technicolor. I mean, it's full of, you know, every conservation parcel, every school parcel, every school property. You know, there are lots in neighborhoods that are owned by the city. You know, that I'm not saying that their intention is to put signs on those parcels, but this ordinance allows that. And when we adopt legislation, we've got to look at the whole picture. How can this legislation be interpreted by other people? I mean, you know, we may have the best intentions in the world, you know, but somebody else comes along, and I'm not just talking about aldermen, I'm talking about people who are, you know, occupying, you know, various positions in the city. You know, this would allow them, as long as the sign complies with paragraph B of this amendment, the zoning board is not involved. There's no requirement. And all the planning board can do is say, okay, does it comply with all of these things? And this doesn't say, this says, you know, one parcel per municipally owned, one sign per municipally owned parcel shall be permitted. So a planning board can't say, oh, we don't think that's a good location. No, they can put it there by right. The planning board has no ability to say no. So my main argument against this is I'm trying to protect our residential neighborhoods, our residential areas from having, you know, signs that are inappropriate placed in their neighborhoods, you know, without their having the ability to oppose it or to have an independent body like the zoning board review it and determine whether it's in character with the neighborhood or not. You know, these provisions do not, contrary, you know, to the impression of, oh, you know, it restricts things. No, this is less restrictive than the current zoning law. This allows, you know, in a residential neighborhood, sign can't be more than 10 square feet. This allows a 40 square foot sign, and it can be an electronic messaging area can be 40 square feet. You know, think of how big 40 square feet is. It's a big sign. And And currently, we do not allow symbols or graphics or images. You know, it's limited to 3 lines of text. This would allow fixed images and fixed images and more than 3 lines of text are permitted. And so I don't think that, you know, that we should allow this, and I'll end my comments there and listen to other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Jettie. Alderman Govea?
Matt, Director Sullivan, do you want to respond?
Just one piece I want to respond to, although you might regret giving me the opportunity. I want to double down on a comment that Alderman Jettie made, and I might make some enemies this evening saying this, but the reason that I agreed to bring this forward is because I am of the opinion that while it's noble of a municipality to regulate itself to its zoning code, and frankly, I think 90% of provisions should apply, there are cases where I think the municipality should be exempted. I'm not suggesting across the board. I'm not suggesting the municipality should be able to erect certain noxious uses or should be completely exempt from all of its rules and regulations, but I do think there are certain legitimate reasons. I'm not suggesting that falls into this category. I expect it maybe doesn't for some folks around the horseshoe this evening. But the reason that I agreed to bring this forward, because truly I have kept this issue separate from the DPW sign. I think there was an intersection of interest in a way, where I think Alderman Dowd, Alderman O'Brien had an interest in maybe a specific sign and a larger sign or a larger sign policy. Ultimately, this initial draft was done by me because I believe that there was a legitimate public purpose here. So I just want to clarify that, and I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you, Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a question and a statement, really. So when we start looking at this, so you kind of covered it, but why do you feel this should go through, and what is the current process that you would go through to get a sign like this?
So, if I may respond, Mr. Chair. So, Alderman Govea, the answer depends on the area in which the sign is being proposed. Currently, our ordinance is a zoning district-based regulation of electronic messaging centers. So it depends whether you're in a commercial zone, a mixed-use zone, or a more pure residential zone, how the sign would be processed. In some cases, it would be by right. In some cases, it would be a special exception to the zoning board, as Alderman Jettie described. That amendment was made some time ago. My fundamental opinion is that, subject to the regulations here, the public interest, and that is sharing information, outweighs the potential impact to areas as a result of electronic messaging centers. I am certain that if there were aggravated brightness issues or flashing or other things, I think that balance would be different. I think the public interest would not outweigh the sign construction and style itself. But my fundamental position is that sharing public information done in a reasonable way is a good use and one that the zoning ordinance should encourage.
Okay. If I can follow up. Yeah, so I more to move into a statement now. So I'm against the legislation in front of us tonight. I feel, as we've heard about earlier, we have an ordinance on the books that makes us follow the regulations that we've set forward. And I'm one who believes that is something we should follow. I don't think the city should be above what anybody else would have to go through, what any business would have to go through. In looking at, obviously, the GIS map here, and this is just a loose estimate typing in City of Nashua, 386 parcels pop up immediately, so call it 380 plus properties around the city. Now, obviously, in my ward, you're not going to put them in half of them. They're all landlocked unless you're trying to advertise the leaves. But, you know, you could put these basically anywhere, and doesn't mean you would, but you could. And I don't feel like that is the best interest of the city. And to add on to that, what this does is it removes a step of bureaucracy for the municipality that we set forward for everybody else to go through. So why should the city be getting special treatment? We set up the system of how you have to go through A, B, C, D, and then you get approved or denied, and then you go through appeals and all of that. Why does the city get special treatment on the process they created? That doesn't seem right to me. If we're going to loosen up regulation, we can have that conversation, but let's look at loosening up regulation for all of our businesses. Let's not just say the city should be special in this situation. We've made these rules, we have them on the books. I sure hope the city follows them because, well, we voted to put them into play in the first place, or the boards before us voted to put them in place before. If we want to have an overarching conversation on this to open it up to everybody, well, that's something we should have, but I really have no interest in loosening this up just for the city. If you want to circumvent bureaucracy just for the city's sake, well, that doesn't sit right with me when we have businesses that are trying to do it and they have to go through the full process. So for those reasons, I really am in opposition to this legislation before us.
Thank you, Alderman Govea. Right before Alderman Clemmons, I just have a follow-up to Director Sullivan's position, how I've interpreted it. Months ago, you came before us and asked us to stop advertising in the newspaper. And now today you're saying these electronic signs are so important to message to the community.
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
I wrote down that note a few minutes ago when Alderman Jettie was talking because I expected that he might raise this very point. And I'm going to compare media. I feel strongly, and it's a feeling, and it's more than that. I have no data to support this, but the idea that a sign along a heavily trafficked road is equal in the informational sharing that it does, or the volume of information that's shared, to a newspaper posting that's buried far in the newspaper. I don't have data to support my position, but I really do feel that those are different. And could I quickly respond to something Alderman Govea said? Just, and again, it's perhaps an opinion, but in my mind at least, governmental speech or public informational speech should be subject to a different level of scrutiny than advertising, and that's an opinion, but you know, if the idea is to share public information that all are to consume, I do view it differently. I have to be careful how I say that, but I do think that's why I would suggest that a lesser standard be applied. Perhaps this is too little of a standard to be applied, but I do think that the ability to share public information should be something that's a preference within the ordinance to some extent. So
Can I
that's just my
follow up
thought.
on that, Mr. Chairman?
Is it Alderman Govea?
Just a quick follow-up on that. Thank you, Alderman. So with that being said, and there seems to be a demand here, is this because we've seen an uptick in these parcels wanting to put up signs that have been denied? Or is this people saying they don't want to go through the process, try to loosen it up? Director Sullivan.
I'm glad that was asked, and I wish I'd commented on that. So what's happening is that as these governmental agencies or entities are doing capital plans for their site or they're doing upgrades, they are literally asking, how can we share information from the site in the best way possible? They're consulting with a sign company, and a sign company is saying, this is the best way to do it. You can share a message every 5 seconds or 10 seconds, and that's what they're being told. So it is an emergent thing that's happening where they are coming asking to do changing signs. The Alderman Jettie is absolutely correct, though. The DPW sign did go through a public process at the Zoning Board of Adjustment and was denied, but we've been fielding inquiries regularly from several departments about future plans that they have and whether electronic signs might be a part of them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Alderman Clemmons, thank you for your patience.
Of course, thank you. So I agree with a lot of the things that Director Sullivan said this evening. In particular, that nuance is okay. I'm paraphrasing, but you know, I think that there are certain times when you can look at an ordinance and say, or a standard and say, well, perhaps this needs an exception, right? But I don't also fault him or the sponsors of the legislation for bringing this forward either. I think it's a good debate to have. But I ultimately fall on the side of this with Alderman Jettie and Gouveia. And the reason is because I don't think that it's a problem for any government agency or wherever it is that wants one of these signs to have to go before the zoning board and get that exception. I may have even said that when the previous legislation came up. If I didn't say it, I probably felt it. And I just think that's the appropriate way to go about this. You know, and it has to do with the sign itself, for me, right? And what a sign like that is. And so when I look at that and I think about a residential neighborhood, I think, would I want to live across the street from a flashing sign? And I can tell you, having lived across the street from a flashing sign, because where my parents' house, there's a big, it's gone now, but there used to be a big flashing yellow light directing people to Route 3. And my bedroom was up over that, and I could see it at night, blinking in for my entire life. So I know what it's like to live in a neighborhood where you have something like that, and it's obnoxious. So I don't mind the fact that whatever agency, whatever group it is here in the city, if it's DPW, if it's a fire department, if it's a school, and they want one of these, then go before the zoning board, make your pitch, explain what its impact is going to be, and let that board decide on a case-by-case basis whether or not that's appropriate or it isn't. I just happen to believe that that is the best process. And it goes back to the point of, we put these regulations in for a reason. And again, it goes back to the point of, and I believe that nuance is okay. So I don't think that an ordinance that said you can't have these signs anywhere in the city is appropriate either. I think they should be looked at on a case-by-case basis. We passed legislation to do that. And I think we should stick with that, with what we have in place. So I had a snarky comment about the DPW. I said, it's a rhetorical question, that what if we passed this, but we said except at that location? I wonder what would happen. But
There'll be new legislation filed next week.
so, I just think that, I just think the process that we have works, and I think this legislation is proof that it works, right? Because we probably wouldn't have this legislation in front of us if that sign hadn't have been denied by the ZBA. Maybe we would have, but yeah, I think the process is just fine, and I'm not going to support this.
Before I move over to Alderman Thibodeau, no, sorry, I can't believe I did that. Tebow, I'm so sorry. I know better. So just clarify, Director Sullivan, so that sign at DPW went to the ZBA and was denied. Is that sign still there?
There's a portable orange sign in the right-of-way adjacent to DPW that is still there. The sign that went to the zoning board that was denied, as Alderman Jettie described, was a permanent sign.
Got it.
That
Okay.
would have been installed
Thank you.
at that location. That sign is not there.
Okay,
obviously.
thank you. I just wanted to make sure I had two different signs in my head.
Clarification on that point, if I may.
Yes.
I was at the special exception briefing with the zoning board. there are a lot more problems with the sign than the electronic portion of it. And that's why it was denied. The size, overall size of the sign and other things. So, you know, that sign, if it ever does exist, has to go through a lot more iterations of approvals. So, and again, you know, when I sponsored this legislation, both Director Sullivan and myself and others felt that we needed to have this conversation because we keep getting blamed for not telling people what they should know. And this legislation may not be written the way you want, and if there's some possible changes to it that Director Sullivan thinks he could make that would make it more applicable for passage, it should probably be tabled in committee and then come back. But this is not a piece of legislation I'm dying on my sword for. I just thought that the discussion needed to be had, and you know, so when people come back and say, well, we didn't know about that, well, you know, how are we gonna tell you? Social media doesn't work, not for the majority of the people over 30. And these days with the political thing, social media is probably something people stay away from. And they just aren't good ways to spread the information to people. And particularly, you know, a lot of our events, the stroll, the dining downtown, and a lot of the events, we get a lot of people, as was presented tonight in that presentation, people from out of town. They're not gonna hear the things, you know, when they're coming to work every day in Nashua, you know, if there was some place they could see that, oh, there's gonna be something, stroll is going on this November, or whatever it is, you know, that would be information that they could use. But, again, if two things. One was that special exception was more than just the electronic portion of that sign. It was other things, and it wasn't presented well to boot by the sign company. So that whole issue of the sign has more issues to go through than this. If you took the rest of the sign out and just had the electronic portion, it probably might have passed. But what they want to do is they want to build a sign that has, it's very nice, same architecture as the building and all that other stuff. So it's, you know, whether they have the sign or not have the sign, it's my feeling is that if they put in the regular sign without any electronics, they're still gonna have those orange things there doing the same information that could have been on a less obtrusive, much more agreeable to the neighborhood, I would think. I wouldn't want one of those big orange things blinking at me all the time. And by the way, there's no blinking on these signs. This still has to apply by the ordinance that says you can't change except every
5 seconds.
5 seconds. Which
Correct.
you think is short, but it's not blinking. So
Patient,
I'm
Alderman
comfortable whatever way this committee wants to go, but maybe it should have a second look. It depends on, you know, whether we think there's a better way to do it, and suggestions that you can make to Director Sullivan to make it more plausible.
All right, now to the most patient Alderman, Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, we don't have any of these signs in Ward 8. You know why? Because you may have heard there's a newsletter. I don't know if you guys heard that. Just kidding. So I don't think these signs, to something Alderman Dowd said earlier, would make us Nash Vegas. I think the casinos would make us look like that. I think to Director Sullivan's point about, like, and you guys said, it's not flashing. It's much less obtrusive than those orange things. Those things are horrible, but, you know, there isn't good ways to spread information in the city. You know, despite the newsletter that only gets to 200 people in a ward of 10,000 people in a city of 90,000, right? So the Telegraph, it's not only is it buried, but it's once a week. So the information is just not going to be there. People aren't going to see it timely. And so I think the signs help. You know, my one question to Director Sullivan through the chair, is there a time when these signs shut down, or it's not 24 hours, right? I didn't see that necessarily in this.
Director Sullivan.
So, yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm glad you raised that question because I do, to Alderman Dowd's point, you know, my clients here, obviously you as the Board of Aldermen, but it's also the other city departments that have brought this question to me about whether they could do these signs in the future. And jumping a little bit ahead, I would maybe like to come back to the committee, and perhaps I have no new information and I don't have an amendment and you take a vote at that time, but I'd like to talk about some reasonable restrictions like that. One I'm hearing is residential zoning. That appears to be a theme, that in residential areas there's concern about these signs. I think that seems to be the case. But there is the ability to limit it to shutting off at whatever time might be reasonable based on the season. That was actually discussed in a meeting today, unrelated to this item tonight, the idea of would shutting a sign off be more acceptable to the neighborhood. I will say, to Alderman Clemens' point and Alderman Jay's point, that conversation usually happens at the zoning board, but you could codify that if there were an interest in moving in this direction or some direction like this. You could say, thou shalt be shut down at 8 p.m. every night or something to that effect, unless there's some weather emergency or something like that. But it's not currently written that way. So as this is written right now, a sign could be on for 24 hours a day, as long as it's sort of in character with the neighborhood. And that's a subjective term that's not well defined.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, that's something I mean, to the point of, you know, sitting up and having a thing, not flashing, but just on outside your bedroom and having to do some kind of shading so you don't see the light is, you know, something obviously I would prefer to see in here. I guess, you know, when you think about businesses, they're trying to sell something. So obviously it's advantageous for them to put the biggest sign they can, or a political sign, right? Something that you're selling something, whether it's a product or a person, where this is trying to get information to people that don't always get the information. And you're not, in the world where it's social media and it's other places, you have to go to these places to get that information. Like, I no longer go to certain places on social media because it's not information. That's the problem, right? The sites that were information are now being taken over by other nonsense. So this is something people are driving by, they're seeing. So it's being forced to them if they're on that road or in that area or whatever. So I think it is good for the public well-being. You know, I was gonna ask the question, you know, I think you hit on it, but the question of, you know, why is, you know, we got some letters where it said, you know, why is the city above everything else? And I think you answered that with Alderman Govea's points about per se, the business. So I don't know if you have anything more to say about that, but that's one we were hearing a little bit by, you know, why does the city always think, and, you know, you probably could bring up, or other people in the city could bring up points where the city does do things differently than a normal business because of A, B, and C, right? You know, like, let me give you an example. Like, you know, people say all the time, like, oh, why don't you just do this with the police salaries? Why don't you just, there's a contract. That might be different than a business where you could fire somebody for this reason. You might not be able to do that, or you might not be able to change their salary because there's a contract. So city does do things differently. In this case, I don't know if you have anything more to add to that.
Well, I'm a bit biased, of course, as a city employee, but I do think if we assume that generally, if we assume good faith when it comes to information sharing on behalf of the city, there are advantages to putting speech out that might not otherwise be permitted in a timely manner. You know, if it's, you know, that it's related to taxes or whatever it might be, that there's an election coming up, there's a reason that we, in my opinion, that we should be more readily able to convey that messaging in a way that a private enterprise might not be able to. But again, I'm biased, but I do think that's sort of an understanding that we all have and agree to. I think what you don't want is you don't want the municipality to construct a 100-foot electronic messaging sign that is totally egregious, and that's not what this ordinance is aimed at, but I think it could go too far, I think is the point.
Yes.
So Alderman Jettie brought up a point about, getting things to your phone, right? And, we
yep.
get Amber Alerts or storms or whatever.
Sure.
Is that something you have to sign up for generally? So again, it would take someone having to go and put themselves, if they have a phone, into, giving their cell phone number to somebody. Like if you were getting alerts from Facebook, you'd have to obviously be a member of Facebook. Is that a way to get something, or does the person have to subscribe to that?
So if I may respond, a little bit out of my comfort zone here, but what I do know is there are different tiers of alert, right? With an Amber Alert, we all get notified. If you have a cellular device, you receive an alert emergency notification. There are other alerts the City of Nashua does through emergency management and the like that you have to opt into. And I expect for a lot of the communications that you share, it's an opt-in thing. There's no other way to build your mailing list. So it depends what that information is that's being shared. We obviously, you can't get into the code red system, which is that emergency alert system, to say, Alderman Tebow's having a ward meeting tonight. It's going to be great, right? There are certain levels of protection there. But yeah, I mean, a lot of what's out there today, and I think personally I appreciate this, is opt-in, so you're not getting bombarded with information. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to support this tonight in some of the things you've said, and so thank you.
I got Alderman Senate, then Alderman Jettie, but I have a follow-up question. Why not craft legislation that permits, the mayor to issue an emergency use for 14 days and seek the further authorization by the board of aldermen? For example, a snow emergency, voting, any type of urgent matter, and then say, okay, we have an elected official who's been chosen to authorize that, and then a check balance by the board if it goes beyond 14 days.
So the response to that would be that mechanism already exists, and we deploy it through those orange signs that we have available to us within the public right-of-way. What you wouldn't have the ability to do in that situation, Alderman Moran, if I'm hearing you correctly, is you wouldn't have that sign upon it. You wouldn't have a sign upon which to display that message unless that sign was permitted through an ordinance or by the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The only signs we currently have in our disposal are those orange signs that we move dynamically around the city based on construction work or other events that are going on. So you really need an ordinance that allows you to construct signs that can show electronic messages to be able to do what you're talking about, I think.
Got it. So just in the case of this ordinance, is a structural sign that's built.
Yes.
In the case of an emergency, the mayor can authorize the orange signs.
The DPW department moves those signs around within sort of their right-of-way powers as needed in safe locations, of course, to convey messaging through an it's not an encumbrance permit. I'm looking over at Corporation Council, but it's some power that they have to deploy those signs as needed across the city, and they use it as needed.
Well, thank you for clarifying, because I find that very helpful, that in the event of an emergency, our hands aren't tied.
Yes.
So there are capabilities to get messages out without interrupting the process of a permanent sign. Alderman Senate.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a vote on this committee tonight, so what I say really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of tonight, but, I came out on my night off, so why not say something? I wanted to make the joke that I'll see Alderman Clemens' flashing beacon in his bedroom and raise you that you haven't lived until the entrance to your first condo is shared with the world's most vulgar and explicit mortgage specialist.
Gil something, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
I know that's not the road that we're going down, but
That's trauma.
I certainly do have a predisposed aversion to electronic signs. That being said, more realistically, I'm erring on the side of if this should reach the full board, not supporting it. Alderman Jettie brought up a good point, and to sort of paraphrase him, of the slippery slope. I think common sense says that we're here because there's an appetite for a sign at the new DPW building, and I get it. I drive by the highway department building in Merrimack pretty frequently, and they have a new sign out there, and it doesn't shut off at 8 o'clock because I've driven past it at all hours of the morning, and it's on. But when I think of this and I think of where we could go from here, my concern is 12 city-owned buildings, which are elementary schools. And some of them have layouts which would make one of these conducive to it. I feel like you could put one of these at Sunset Heights, set away from the residential area that surrounds it, and have nobody even really realize unless they're on that property. You couldn't put one at Dr. Crisp without somebody realizing. And I feel like more of our schools follow the format of Dr. Crisp, where they're right on a major traveled road, and you're going to be affecting somebody's quality of life with this. Yeah, we could codify it further, again, as was mentioned, to shut off at 8 o'clock, but it just feels like taking that first step towards tumbling down a cliff that I'm not comfortable going down. I don't see the issue, as my colleague from Ward 1 mentioned, finding where the appetite for these signs is and going through the process that we have prescribed. I personally feel that the sign we have out front here on the plaza at City Hall, it's probably due for an update, and within the grand scheme of Main Street here, it would be an attractive addition to the plaza out there, and it'd be a very useful tool for us to have in conveying that message. I can understand where the aversion would be at the DPW building, because if you look right across the street, there's at least 2 homes that are gonna be facing this directly all hours of the day. Like Alderman Gouveia, I'm not a fan, and I'm gonna put this sort of crudely, I'm not a fan of rules for thee, but not for me. And we speak so often in this chamber about the optics of what we do and how the public is going to react, and that's, when I brought this up to a couple of my peers, that's the first thing they said was, well, what makes the city so special? And we've had an answer to that to an extent, and there's an argument for it, but it's not an argument that I can personally get behind, especially with precedents of being so concerned over how things are going to be publicly received. So again, I don't get a vote here tonight, but should this reach the full board, I will not be in support of it. Thank you.
Alderman Jerry, you've already had a turn. Do you mind if I ask President Wilshire?
Not at all.
President Wilshire.
I'll be brief. I don't support this as is. I think on a case-by-case basis, I could support it, but that's about it.
Thank you, President Wilshire. That's the most clear and precise. No offense to my colleagues on the committee. Alderman Jettie.
That's not fair.
It's a setup.
So I just wanted to remind, people who are talking about, different ways of communicating with the public and, finding different ways, how we could do this. You're missing the essential point of this ordinance. And the essential point of this ordinance is that, right now, the law says that notwithstanding any other provisions of this article, signs to be erected by the city of Nashua related to a governmental use are permitted in every zoning district by special exception by the zoning board. What this ordinance does is it removes the requirement that they have, that's the city wanting to put a sign up has to go before the zoning board and get a special exception. It removes that. It says the city can put up signs by right, and that's what Director Sullivan wants. And I think most of us are against that. So with that in mind, to make it clear to Director Sullivan and anyone else, I'd like to make a motion to amend the motion that's before us to change it from recommending final passage to recommending that this ordinance be rejected.
Is it rejected or inexpedient to legislate?
Indefinite postponement.
I'll defer to Corporation Counsel since
The practice in the Board of Aldermen has been to use the term indefinitely postponed, which means the precise same thing as rejected.
Alderman Jettie, is that your motion, indefinite postponement?
yes.
Alderman Clemmons and Alderman
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I will support that motion. But I wanted to get, I wanted to get this point out there. I am not anti-sign. Okay, I think that there could be places in the city where these could be really nice. And to Alderman Senate's point, maybe outside in front of City Hall or something like that, like in certain areas, I think it might be good. What I am against is automatically allowing it. So that's the reason I'm gonna support Alderman Jetty's motion now, but I just wanted to get that out there. You know, if one of the departments in this city is doing something and they really feel that one of these is gonna be helpful, and it's gonna be in a place where, you know, the neighborhood won't mind, then bring it forward. I'm not anti-sign. Well, I don't think many of us are anti-sign. We just want it to go through the proper channels. So, thank you.
Director
May I offer a very brief comment, and I should have offered this during mine. It is possible that I will be back then, and I just want to explain why. In the most recent zoning board proceedings relative to the DPW sign, and in other similar proceedings around electronic signs particularly, they have articulated, and I know I'm speaking for them, this is in the minutes, that they would like some affirmative direction from the Board of Aldermen, because they also don't reject the idea of electronic signs, but they are not totally comfortable with applying the special exception criteria to them. This was in the minutes of the recent discussion in some form, and they've said it in the past. And so I've struggled with what that means. Is it a zoning change? Is it a discussion at the Board of Aldermen? I think we've gotten that discussion this evening. It's been very helpful. But I do think the zoning board are perhaps still not comfortable with their role in the process, because there hasn't been a more affirmative articulation of how the governing body feels about electronic messaging signs. So should the motion pass, I just want to be clear that it's possible I might come back for another discussion about this or some other ordinance modification, perhaps not the one before you this evening, but they seem to be looking for some direction on this, because it has come up on the Performing Arts Center, on DPW. They're looking for a little more, I think, than what they have right now.
Alderman Tebow and then Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, that's some good points by Director Sullivan there. I hope you do come back, just because, I mean, you know, Alderman Moran will probably tell you his feelings about the zoning board. But as far as the zoning board goes, if they're not gonna make exceptions because they don't know what to do, and we're not gonna authorize this, then they're never gonna let one of these signs go by. And I get what you're saying, that the area is too gray, and they want direction from us. Well, we're giving them direction now that we don't want that done, unless there's an exception, but then it has to be done by them, but they don't know what to do for an exception. So it's kind of like.
And I don't want to weaponize their lack of clarity around this. I think that there will be a time for another discussion. I don't think that they'll hear tonight's vote and say, oh, electronic signs are not an option in the city of Nashua. But I think they're looking at electronic signs as one of these threshold sort of identity crisis zoning issues of, if we allow these, whether for municipal uses or widespread, it will change the character of the community. And so I think they're very nervous, even in a special exception proceeding, about granting approvals. I'm not saying that means they're denying everything, but I think they're looking for a little more clarity. And perhaps this isn't the vessel through which to give them that clarity. Perhaps it's another change that needs to be considered.
Of course, yeah.
So, I know we talked a little bit about optics and how things look optically, but we're also the same board that gave ourselves a raise. So, you know, so that is not good optically, I'll tell you that right now. So, that will hurt us a lot more probably than this. These signs' brightness, you know, I look at the newer signs compared to, you know, signs in the days when, you know, they were much brighter and not efficient and all that. Are they so bright that if they're across the street from someone, that it's really gonna shine into their house? I mean, I'm just trying to think, would it be that obtrusive? I don't know, that's, you know.
I think it depends on the sign, and it depends on, you know, the resident. I mean, I know in my household, I'm more sensitive to lights that our neighbors have than She is, so I think it depends on who the person is on the other end of it, but there are reasonable lumen requirements that you can put in place. I think we can use the mortgage specialist sign as an example of this. That is not controlled in any way, shape, or form. I think it's ridiculous. It was out of control. I don't think we're talking about that in any way, shape, or form, but I do think to that end, should those lumen requirements be codified? They could be. I think they need to be context sensitive. Downtown is obviously different from an R40 district, but we could put more specific numbers behind that, Alderman Tebow.
Follow up. So in light of some of the things you're saying about you coming back with maybe some of these things more defined so we can help the zoning board, I think I'm going to reverse. I think I'm going to actually support Alderman Jetty's postponement on this so we can maybe get something better. I am for it generally, but I think in this case, I think it's better to get maybe some better legislation back to us. Thank you.
Alderman Dowd. Oh, I'm sorry, Alderman Govea, then Alderman Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think for me, once again, this legislation is a question of process, not so much a question of the sign. Like my colleague at large said, and I think he said it really well, it has nothing to do with this sign itself. I think it should just be a case-by-case situation. I think we have a board, the ZBA, and what we've heard tonight is it works. We've heard about times where this board has come through and that this process works. So I like what we're doing here. This is a process question, in my opinion. Let's look at these signs one at a time and have that board come up with a real what they want to do with it. And if that means they want an opinion from either this committee or the Committee on Infrastructure, I think that's fair. I think that's a discussion that could happen, and you could get a committee recommendation. Do I feel it should, anytime anybody wants a sign, should it have to go through the physical board of aldermen? Probably not. I think we would have some very long meetings that would take power from another board, but if they wanted a committee recommendation, I don't see anything wrong with that, and I think that could really help them give guidance on where we want that leeway to be and where that line is drawn, because I do see where their hesitation would be in approving these signs of how far can we go without going against what the Board of Aldermen's vision is in their line. So I think we're getting on something here. I don't think this legislation is the correct way to get it done, so I will be supporting the current motion.
Alderman Dowd.
Now you see why we wanted to bring forth the discussion. Because we hadn't had it, and now all these things are laid on the table, so that's fine. Years ago, when that sign went in on Amber Street, the mortgage sign, the mortgage company now, Brian was a very close friend of mine, and we had, as soon as we saw that sign, it was like, holy crap, how the hell do we get rid of this? Well, we couldn't. We had no sign.
We did. We got rid of it. I took them to court, we got rid of it.
Sign's still there.
No, it isn't.
It's
not in
It's not a
operation.
debate, guys.
Anyway,
The sign's
so
gone.
that was the sign that started the whole sign legislation. And, the only question is it time to reconsider? It's been a long time, and electronic signs are a little different today. The other thing is, all of these signs that we're talking about today are LEDs. And they can be dimmed or brightened as you see fit. It can even be automated by the controls. So that's one thing. And the other thing that when we started talking about, putting them on city streets, distracting drivers, the state has signs across the highway now with messages, relative to hands-free, relative to speeding, relative to all kinds of stuff, and they're huge, and they're across the highway. And the cars are supposed to be doing 55, and they're doing 75. And I don't think those signs have caused any accidents. So, I mean, as far as the traffic's concerned, people are getting used to reading signs. So, good discussion. I think Director Sullivan has some inputs to go back. And the only thing is relative to the sign at DPW, God knows where that's going to end up. It's probably going to go in for another special exception. And even if it's not an electronic sign, it still has to have, unless they make it smaller, it's going to probably have to get some kind of approval. But my only thing is, there should be a sign there that identifies that that's where the DPW headquarters is. Whether it's electronic or not, that's neither here nor there. But that wasn't the purpose of me bringing this forward.
Thank you, Alderman Dowd. Attorney Bolton, do you mind clarifying the process the city took to get that sign down?
It was in violation of our current zoning ordinance. We went to court. We got an order that they could not operate it in violation of the ordinance. We got them fined several tens of thousands of dollars. And at some point, we were in litigation to actually levy on the sign itself. Basically, that means like a foreclosure proceeding in order to collect the fine. Simultaneously, there was litigation up in Manchester brought by some private parties who had been defamed by some of the messages on the same company's sign up in Manchester. They ended up going out of business. I think they filed a petition in bankruptcy, and ultimately, they are not, as far as I know, in business now. I think there's some other use being made of that property.
I think one of the guys that sued him took that property as part of the settlement. That is correct. Okay, before I call for a final vote, I just make a statement. I am going to support the motion. I am of the opinion that the city should go through the same process as a regular citizen. Yes, I am very frustrated with the ZBA, just general and boards overall, whom, whether it's the mayor or the board appoints these folks, and almost afterwards just ruling rather than taking feedback from elected officials. But that's for a battle for another day. Thanks for bringing that up, Alderman. But ultimately, I just don't agree that the city should have a special exception unless it's in the case of an emergency. All right. Will the clerk please call, actually, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. The motion for indefinite postponement succeeds.
So procedurally, there was a motion for to recommend final passage. I made a motion to amend.
It's not
Well,
a
it's a-
motion to
it's a
amend.
superseding
It's a
amendment.
motion to recommend indefinite postponement,
Yeah.
which takes precedence. It's not an amendment to the other
It's a
motion.
superseding motion, so.
Okay, thank you.
So now that'll go to the full board with that recommendation. Tabled in committee.
None.
General discussion? Public comment? No. Remarks by Alderman? Seeing none. Alderman Govea?
I make a motion to adjourn.
All those that motion's in order. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? And we are adjourned at 8:48 PM.